The water erosion that we see in places that are now deserts, but were well watered at this time. And we talked about that yesterday. And then I started to tell you about how as the water was snowed onto the land, that it was taken out of the ocean, and so sea levels would have dropped. And these are pictures from a secular textbook, in other words, an evolutionary textbook on the Ice Age. And I want you to notice that St. Louis is on that picture and Chicago's like under the glacier. So all that area was kind of like the North Pole during the Ice Age. Well, when you pull that amount of water out of the Earth's oceans, remember when they first got off of the Ark, sea level was 300 feet deeper than what it is today. But at the peak of the Ice Age, sea level would have been 300 feet lower than what it is today. That's a 600-foot drop. And I want you guys to understand, the secular scientists will tell the exact same thing. We all see the change. We just believe it was during a shorter period of time, during this time after the flood. And so what happens is that when you have sea level 300 feet lower than what it is today, all these continental shelves are exposed. All these areas that aren't super, super deep in the ocean are exposed. And so what happens is that people and animals can walk across the continental shelves, because remember, they landed in the mountains of Ararat, and people and animals could walk from there across the Bering Straits and down through into the Americas. And so they could walk down into Australia through those islands in that area and walk across the continental shelf down into Australia. And so the animals as well as the people migrated. Now, I told you if you were near the water during the Ice Age, it was warm. If you were inland, it was cold. I want you to notice the North Pole is a big ocean. There's no land there, whereas the South Pole, the Antarctica is there, and it's a big land mass. So when it was during the Ice Age, all of that was warm, and the water was warm. You and I could have had a picnic on the beach on Antarctica. But if you were inland, it would have been cold. We could have taken a fishing trip in the Arctic Ocean. It was ice-free. It wouldn't have been ridiculous. But if you were inland, it was cold. Please understand that. Now, this explains a few things. You ever watch the movie March of the Penguins? Okay. I watched March of the Penguins. I'm thinking, what is wrong with those silly birds? In case you haven't watched March of the Penguins, these poor emperor penguins, they walk all the way inland, great distances to where they were born to have their babies. They stand there in the coldest place on Earth at the coldest time of the year, holding that daddy penguin, holds that egg on his feet, and while mama penguin goes back and feeds over 200 miles to get back to the water to feed. She leaves him there for, I think it's like 60 days, something horrendous. He stands there freezing to death, and then she comes back, and then he goes back, and if he manages, he doesn't die. She comes back, feeds the baby, and he has to manage to get back or he dies. Now I'm watching that going, what is wrong with those silly birds? I mean, come on, didn't you think that? And then it hit me. Those birds started doing that during the Ice Age after the flood. And at that time, that wasn't that far inland because it was ice-free. And as the Ice Age ended, the ice started to build up and started to build up all the way out to the water. And those poor birds were still going way inland where they had started. And that's why that trek had gotten so ridiculous. This explains a lot of things when you know this. Okay, how about the mammoths? We're told that there were all these woolly mammoths and mammoths up along the north coast of Alaska and Siberia. And actually, this is a map showing you the red spots. You're looking down at the Arctic Ocean, are showing you where they found frozen mammoths. And so they'll tell you there used to be thousands, herds of thousands of mammoths up there because Russia says that they have an unending supply of mammoth ivory right there in the Arctic Ocean off the coast of Siberia because so many mammoths went in there and died. Okay, I'll tell you my question. I'm a horse owner. I spend a lot of money on hay, keeping my horses healthy. Who fed all those elephants? If it wasn't warm along the coast so that grass could grow, how did all those elephants live there in the first place? They'd never tell you that on these shows where they talk about these frozen mammoths. Well, apparently, after the flood, during the Ice Age, if you're near the water, it was warm. So there'd have been grass. And if you're inland, it was cold. And so the mammoths knew that if the weather got bad inland, head for the water. Mama mammoth would say, let's just head for the beach. If you went to the beach, it was safe. And so that last time when the Earth's oceans finally cooled and Mama mammoth, she'd been doing this for a couple hundred years, heads for the beach, look what happens. They all look like they're either on the water or heading for the water, don't they? And that's where they were frozen. Now, I don't know if you've ever read the Laura Ingalls Wilder's books. Yeah, remember that there was a bad blizzard and the cows froze standing up? They literally asphyxiated because their breath made a cave around their nose and then they asphyxiated. Yeah, it still happens in bad blizzards. Because remember, there's moisture in our breath. And so if an animal is out in that kind of the thing, it'll make a cave around there, and then when they run out of oxygen, they just die. And so it's probably what happened to these guys. Now, there aren't that many that are found, though. So this wasn't, and some people will try to say that this happened during the flood. They're found in Ice Age strata. They are not found in flood strata. Remember, the flood strata is lower and global, and the Ice Age strata is up higher. So these guys were apparently buried during the Ice Age. When the Ice Age ended, which took about 700 to 1,000 years, when the Earth's oceans cooled, because the air cleared up pretty quickly, the volcanic activity subsided fairly quickly, but it took longer for the Earth's oceans to cool. When the Earth's oceans finally cooled and the Ice Age ended, the weather patterns would have shifted drastically and quickly. Okay, no slow changes. It would have been very quick changes. And the animals that happened to live in places that had been warm along the north coast of Alaska or whatever, like those elephants, all of a sudden it would be cold and they'd be out of luck. The animals that happened to take up residence in North Africa, which was a lush tropical rainforest during the Ice Age, all of a sudden the water got turned off and no more water, and now they're living in the world's largest sand pit. Right? The Sahara Desert. So a lot of the larger animals particularly would have become extinct at this point in time, even though they had survived to get off the ark, to reproduce and to spread out. Some of these animals would have become extinct at this point just because of these drastic environmental changes that they weren't able to handle. I want you to know that they still find remnant lakes from the Ice Age with crocodiles still in them hundreds of miles from any other near water that are leftovers from the Ice Age. I think that is so cool. And if you go to Alaska, you can actually see glaciers that are remnants of the Ice Age, which I did, while I was there. I had to go take pieces, little rocks from the bottom, because I had a little piece of the Ice Age. My husband's like, could you get over the rock thing? They're too heavy, So I just carried what I could get in my pocket. But anyway, there are still places where you can see some of that stuff. So that's the uppermost portion of the rocks would be the Ice Age layers. And we talked about that yesterday. If the flood covered the entire planet like the Bible tells us, we should see global rock strata, and we actually do, and this is just two examples. The Tapeats sandstone and Redwall limestone actually go across the United States, Canada, and even go across the Atlantic Ocean and are seen again over in England. And then the chalk beds of England, once again, I'm not a geologist, so I'm just going to share what they say, can be traced from Europe into the Middle East and are found in the Midwest of the United States and in Western Australia. These are global rock strata. That's logical. That's what we would expect to see. And even the evolutionists will tell you, well, that's because it was all Pangea at one point in time and blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, they're missing it, aren't they? Okay, so let's get back to man. Can you handle it? You ready? All right. So the ark lands on the mountains of Ararat, and they cruise down the hill, and it looks pretty good, and that's the area called Mesopotamia. And that's where history starts. You know why? Because it was down the hill from where the flood landed. That's very logical. Okay, and they get down the hill, and it's a nice looking area. And I want you to understand that this is important to me. There are books, Christian books, that will try to tell you that Eden, the Garden of Eden, was in this area. We have no idea where the Garden of Eden was. The planet was literally ripped apart, resurfaced under a mile deep of strata, and jammed back together and then came apart again. Do we have any idea where Eden is? Absolutely not. It's someplace a mile deep in sedimentary rock layers. Everything is that was pre-flood. So why do certain Christian books try to tell us that Eden was in this area? Because we see Assyria and we see the Euphrates River, and those things are mentioned before the flood. Well, why would we see that? What do people do when they get to a new place? Oh, look, man, that looks like York. Let's call it New York. Oh, look, man, that reminds me of the old Euphrates River. Let's call it the Euphrates. And if you will look at the description of the Euphrates River in Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, and then you look at the actual river that exists today, you will see they are not the same river. There is no way they're the same river. They just bear the same name. People do stuff like that. They still do stuff like that. So I want you to understand that part and process this correctly. And again, secular history will start. They'll say the cradle of civilization is Mesopotamia. They're right. That's where the ark landed, right up the hill. And that's why people were there. Now remember, people got together and they started to, there was a Nimrod in every crowd, right? And he started to build a tower and says, let's not leave here. Let's worship here. Let's worship the stars. You know, that's what some people believe he was saying. But anyway, one way or another, he wasn't doing what God had told him, because God told him to go out and repopulate the planet. And they weren't. He wanted them to keep them there. So God says, oh, we can't do this again. So he confounded or confused their languages. When God separated them, basically they went to work that day, they couldn't talk to each other, and let's be honest, it's rather irritating when you speak a different language than somebody that you think you're supposed to be able to talk to. Happens to me in Walmart a lot, okay, and forgive me, but it is. It's very frustrating when you look at them and go, I don't understand, and they don't understand you either. So it would be very hard for these people to go to work that day and nobody to be able to talk the same language. Well, apparently God broke it up into between 12 and 20 language groups. And why would he do that? Because he wanted families to stay together, didn't he? So everybody in your family you'd understand. Because God's all about family, isn't he? But he wanted them to spread out. He wanted to separate them so that they would go populate the planet. Now, these pictures are interesting because I want you to understand evolution is that top picture. It's that idea that everything came from an original life form, and we see everything we do today, which would be the top of the picture, and that would be the evolutionary tree. Everything came from one life form and spread out into all the variations that you see today. But what do we actually see today? What can we see, smell, taste, hear, and touch? The very top of the tree. The very top of the tree. Does that make sense? Now, if you look at the very bottom picture, that's actually what we believe. Evolutionists think we believe the middle picture. The middle picture would say that everything is today is exactly as God made it. We don't believe that. We don't believe that at all. But that's what they believe we believe, and that's not true. That's actually what they believed at Darwin's time, and that's part of the reason Darwin got confused. You people are going to take biology, you'll hear about that. What we really believe is that bottom picture. The bottom picture is what we believe, that God created certain kinds, and from those kinds we got some variation, but they only have variety within kind. Does everybody see that? So either way, though, it fits what the top, what we see now is. You know what's interesting? That bottom picture is also what we believe happened at the Tower of Babel with languages. If you're a linguist, linguists get very confused about the Bible because they'll go, well, wait a second, you know, we see certain language groups and we don't see it all, you know, they change. Languages change over time. That's not a problem because we believe that bottom picture. God originally separated them into 12 to 20 language groups, and every language that is on earth today comes from one of those 12 to 20 language groups. It's interesting that if you go to Holland or Germany and read on gravestones, you'll be able to read some of it because English is a related language to those languages. Now, if they said it, I wouldn't be able to understand it, but I can read it and get an idea because there's still some similarities. And linguists will agree to that there are 12 to 20 language groups that all languages come from. So we see that from the Tower of Babel. And then when people separated out, as they separated out in family groups. And Japheth's family went north up into Europe and hit the ice layers, the glaciers. Ham's family went south into Africa. And Shem's family went east into the Middle East. And actually, if someone says that somebody is anti-Semitic, and we all take that as meaning against the Jews, anti-Semitic actually comes from the word anti-Shemite. It means you're against Shem's family. I said that to a Jewish person once, and they freaked out. They're like, wow, I didn't know that, and that's where it comes from. So that's what it's actually talking about.